Well, I'm proud to say that our representative of the United States Congress has stood up for our rights and represented cannabis truthfully in the face of the drug war machine. So I want to thank Congressman Earl Blumenauer for coming out here today. It's my great pleasure to introduce him. Welcome, Congressman Earl Blumenauer.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to spend a few minutes with you this afternoon. Oregon has led in innovation nationally. We protected our beaches, the bottle bill, land use. 40 years ago, Oregon was the first state to decriminalize marijuana. And I was an impressionable young legislator, actually voted on that legislation. And there was another debate that occurred during that session. It was led by a conservative Republican pig farmer from Hermiston, Oregon, a remarkable gentleman named Stafford Hansel, who had a distinguished career as a long-term state legislator. He was active in administration. He helped protect the land use system. But Stafford gave what I think was one of the most compelling speeches I've ever heard in my life. Here was a conservative Republican, didn't smoke, drink, swear, who got up and led the state legislature through a tutorial. He pointed out a package of cigarettes that killed 400,000 people a year that was legal. He had a bottle of Jack Daniels. I think it may have been the only time he'd ever held a bottle of liquor. And he pointed out that for some people, alcohol was toxic, and it contributed to the deaths of tens of thousands of people on a highway each year. And then he had a baggie with a marijuana cigarette. And he pointed out that people didn't die from it, that it wasn't as addictive, it wasn't as destructive, and that it was illegal. And he proceeded to defend a bill we had on the floor of the House that would have authorized 2 plants for personal consumption. I'm told by knowledgeable people at the Capitol at that time, if the 19 of us who voted for it had been joined by the people who voted no but smoked dope, that it probably would have passed, and Oregon would have been the first state to legalize adult use. At the same time, Oregon was having this discussion about a more rational approach to marijuana. We were watching at the federal level a war on drugs being launched in the Nixon administration. And it had a much different approach to marijuana. The legacy of that war on drugs was classifying marijuana as a Schedule I drug. The consequences of that are legion. First and foremost, as you know, classifying marijuana as being as dangerous as heroin or LSD is simply false. It's false. Telling people that it is more dangerous than cocaine or methamphetamines, Schedule II, the meth epidemic that is destroying rural and small-town communities, suggests we've got our priorities upside down. It also suggests to me part of a need to reappraise what can only be described as a failed war on drugs. We're spending $25 billion a year. We are arresting 750,000 people a year for something that most Americans now think should be legal. And there are, as you're well aware, some of the most egregious racial disparities targeting young African American men greater than any other sector of the population, even though their use is no greater, maybe even a little less, than white young men. And there are people doing time now as a result of the consequences of this act. We've been involved in Congress in an effort to help rationalize our drug treatment, drug approaches. Part of it is to make sure that the federal government is not interfering in medical marijuana. Part of the lie in federal statute as a category with Schedule I narcotic, it has no medicinal therapeutic value. Not true. And luckily, voters starting in California in 1996 as the first state, followed by Oregon in the next election. We now have 21 states and the District of Columbia representing over 106 million Americans who have access that's legal under state law to medical marijuana. A million Americans now are legally authorized to have access, and I have heard countless stories about the difference that it has made in their lives. Part of what we're doing in Congress, and I will tell you, I'm encouraged because we now have 13 pieces of legislation, most of it bipartisan, to try and bring some sense into this upside-down world that is marijuana regulation in the United States. We have legislation and bipartisan support to stop the lunacy of making legal marijuana businesses be all cash enterprises. What's the logic here? If you care about money laundering, if you care about tax evasion, or just burglary, forcing perfectly legal enterprises to pay their taxes with a shopping bag full of $20 bills, doesn't make any sense at all. Or because of a quirk in the tax law, forcing them to pay 2 and 3 times higher tax rates, again for perfectly legal businesses, is wrong. But I will tell you, some of you are familiar with a conservative Republican tax advocate, Grover Norquist. Grover was with me at a press conference for my bill to allow legal marijuana businesses to deduct their business expenses. That's how far we're coming. That's how far we're coming. Wednesday, on the floor of the House, I had an amendment that would have allowed our veterans to be able to talk to their VA doctors about marijuana. Why should our veterans be treated as second-class citizens in those states where medical marijuana is legal? Why should they not be able to talk to their primary doctor about whether it's right for them or wrong? We weren't successful, but we got 195 votes, including 24 Republicans who said, this doesn't make any sense. And I was told by one of my Republican co-sponsors of the legislation that he was convinced that there were 12 or 13 Republicans who, if they better understood it, would have voted with us. We're on the move in the United States Congress. We passed an amendment that allows research agriculture institutions to research industrial hemp, which passed with a significant yes vote. We now have a dozen states that are poised to allow industrial hemp production, and we have signals from the administration that these are part of the smaller fish that the administration's not going to fry, that we'll be able to proceed with this. And it's about time. Some of you have been involved with trying to promote not just the use of legal hemp products, which of course they are, and they're sustainable, and they're beneficial. It's just that Oregon farmers and ranchers can't grow it. Kentucky tobacco farmers can't grow it. It's got to be imported from outside the United States. But we're turning the corner on that. We have to do a better job, I think, of breaking the stranglehold of this pernicious classification that prevents research into marijuana. Excuse me. Up on the Hill, I met with neurologists, people who are dealing with problems of our children. They talked about those with violent epilepsy. Getting all choked up here. These parents are willing to move their families to be able to have access to medical marijuana that will prevent these violent seizures. But the scientists cannot get marijuana to study what works and why. That's an outrage. Let me cut to the chase. Oregon was a leader 40 years ago in decriminalization. Oregon has a chance to be the explosion that breaks the dam on marijuana policy nationally. It's great what we have in Washington and Colorado. It's great that we've got 21 states in the District of Columbia with medical marijuana, but we're just on the cusp right now of changing national policy once and for all. It'll be great in Alaska if this summer they legalize adult use, but Alaska is sort of up there and out there. I don't think the land of the midnight sun and Sarah Palin is going to start a national trend. It's great that medical marijuana is on the ballot in Florida this year. 700,000 signatures. But given the Florida Constitution, it'll require a 60% less yes vote to pass, and that's questionable. Here in Oregon, we have an opportunity to cast a ballot for a rational marijuana policy that will be followed across the country. It'll open the floodgates in California in 2016, and we can get down to business. We can tax it, regulate it, keep it out of the hands of the kids, and stop interfering with people's lives. I'd ask you to study it, get involved, sign a petition, and spread the word so that we can have success this November. Oregon can do it. Thank you very much.
Congressman Blumenauer, everyone. Oh my goodness. It feels so good. What an Oregon privilege to have such a distinguished leader. You know, you guys elected him all the way back in 1996 to the House of Representatives, and he's been going ever since, championed so many causes on the Oregon level and the national level. You guys heard him right there. He's talking Oregon. He's ready to push Oregon as a leader of states. So exciting. Another point is, you guys don't forget, speaking of voting, voting's coming up in November, and you guys are going to see Congressman Earl Blumenauer's name on the ballot. Even though you're not going to see an opponent, still mark his name. He is no blank candidate. He is an elected candidate, and we want to elect him ourselves and keep this going. Thank you, Congressman Blumenauer. What a privilege.